Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very welcome to the Auto SCM conference organized by Auto SCM 2022, organized by CI Institute of Logistics. We have a plethora of distinguished speakers: Mr. Sudhir Gurtu, Managing Director, LEADEC India; Mr. S. Sitaraju, Chief Business Development Officer, Deen Dayal Port Authority, erstwhile it was called the Kandla Port; Mr. Anjuman Sinha, Partner, AT Kearney, India; and Mr. Shovik Banerjee, Partner, AT Kearney, India. Let me extend a warm welcome to Mr. Sudhir Gurtu, Managing Director, LEADEC India Private Limited. Mr. Gurtu is currently heading LEADEC India and has been instrumental in setting up the company. He has held a board level position at General Motors India and Indonesia and has 3 decades of experience in automotive and management roles. I also take this opportunity to welcome Mr. S. Sitaraju, Chief Business Officer, Deen Dayal Port Authority, known as Kandla Port earlier. Mr. S. Sitaraju has an apt understanding of the current trends for major and non-major port operations, the competitive landscape, and the outlook for the industry in the VUCA environment in terms of global investment, employment creation for port and port industrialization. And we all know the last few years, because of COVID, have not been very straight for port operations. So welcome, sir, and we'd love to share your experience. Let me also extend my warm welcome to Mr. Anshuman Sinha and Shovik Banerjee, both partners from AT Kearney, India. Mr. Anshuman Sinha leads AT Kearney's transportation and logistics practice in India, and he has over 15 years of experience in advising leading logistics, express, and supply chain companies, both Indian and global, across topics ranging from strategy to operations. Mr. Shovik is a partner with AT Kearney's automotive and transportation practice in India, and he has over 12 years of experience of working with Indian and MNC automotive industrial goods OEMs, tier ones, and other participants across the automotive value chain. With regards to the conference, ladies and gentlemen, nearly 80% of global automotive supply chain has links to China in some way or the other. As manufacturing stopped in China, there was a huge impact on global manufacturing establishment. Auto companies, specifically in the US, Japan, Germany, and Korea, are increasingly shifting to nearshoring, which refers to an organization's transfer of certain business operations to a nearby country. OEMs worldwide are reducing or even eliminating dependence on sources that are perceived as risky and rethinking their use of lean manufacturing strategies, which have been a darling of the sector over the years. The US-China trade war has motivated some firms to a China plus one strategy of spreading production between China and another South Asian country. The market and raw material prices due to inflationary pressure. Now a drought has gripped economic activity in southwestern China, hinting a kind of disruption that climate on global supplies. Risk management in automotive supply chain focus area, and the changing consumer expectation, clean air, alternate fuels, electric and hybrid vehicle adaptation. In short, this is a deck supply chains, the traditional automotive businesses.
I think he has dropped out.
Yeah, he is back. Chairman, you're on mute.
I'm saying technology doesn't work when we need it the most. So sorry for the disruption again. So what I was saying, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a decade where the entire automotive industry, the entire factors that influence the automotive industry are going to change drastically. Customers, technology, supplier base, fuel prices, and even even in electric vehicles, the availability of electricity, the dispersion of electricity at the consumption points is also going to be a challenge. So we'll I mean at least have a very interesting decade. So despite the overall Indian automotive industry facing a massive decline, EV sales have jumped over 200% to 4,28,203 units in FY22, up from 134,463 units in FY21. And fueled by the government policies, overall sales of EVs are likely to jump to 16 lakh units, which is 1.6 million units in FY25. The growth is likely to be at a 60% CAGR from FY22. There is a mounting pressure on the industry to build a robust supply chain to keep up the growing demand. Service providers need to deploy additional capacity to meet growing service requirements. With major automotive players reworking the ESG policies and finding ways to improve sustainability across the supply chain echelons, such policies tend to influence total cost of supply and require continuous efforts in ensuring compliance with ESG norms in the target markets. Supply assurance requirements have driven OEMs to pursue nearshoring without losing focus on past gains. This requires adjustments in collaboration, redesigning supply chain, revised risk planning models. This conference aims at presenting three themes. Number one, the trends of nearshoring. Number two, the rapid rise of EV sales. And number three, the increased focus of auto OEMs on ESG practices. Happy to welcome all the speakers on the dais and the audience across the country to have a very interesting day. Now I request Mr. Anshuman Sinha and Mr. Shovik Banerjee, partners from AT Kearney, to deliver their theme address. And post that, Mr. S. Sitaraju will deliver his context of the first and last mile delivery in the port perspective. And the Managing Director of LEADEC, Mr. Gurtu, inaugural address. So over to Mr. Sinha and Mr. Banerjee.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity. And it's as always, every year it's a privilege for us to be a part of this session. And as we were, deliberating with CII as to how do we look at the themes for this year, while my colleague Shovik brings up the presentation, I think one of the interesting things we thought about, in fact, the choice of words you used, Chairman, was very apt in terms of the fact that we are going to have an interesting decade because some of the changes that we are seeing in some ways will never go back. So we have reached an era of these themes around nearshoring, these themes around EV has, for example, crossed a absolute critical mass in India, and there is no going back. It is no longer a sort of a fancy technical project, but a hardcore mainstream vehicle platform. So we do see that some of these changes are here to stay. And that's where we sort of deliberated as to what should be the theme for this presentation, keeping in mind the changes that we have gone through over the last couple of years in COVID. But now that we are emerging from there, how do the supply chains adjust to some of these new realities? So one of the Shovik, if you can move to the next slide, please. So one of the I just wanted to place this in context before we start, which is that the fact that during the COVID time, obviously sales declined for the automotive industry, which had a huge impact on the supply chain, suppliers, logistics companies, everybody who's part of the overall value chain. Sales are now beginning to rebound. They are likely to go up at a growth rate of 3%, which was higher than the growth rate that we were seeing in the years before COVID. But this is happening at a time when the pressures on the supply chain on account of environmental consciousness, on account of ESG adherence, both from investors, whether it is stakeholders, whether it is governments, it's sort of an unprecedented high. So there is just so much scrutiny on the auto supply chains to be compliant with many of these directions, while also balancing their dependence away from China, while also addressing some of these pressures from, like I said, from their investors and their other shareholders. That it's a time, it's almost like when we were learning to drive a car for the first time. There are so many moving things inside the vehicle that you just have to be conscious of not moving away from the road, but keeping everything on track, right? So for us, the automotive supply chains are at that position. There is just so many changes happening all around us while we are seeing this trajectory back. So volumes have to ramp up, suppliers have to get back their production basis, but you also have to be conscious of the fact that these pressures will be forever here to stay. So in that context, that's where we thought that these three themes made sense for us to, as a group, to debate here. The first one, as we talked about, was around nearshoring, and I think, as Chairman, as you rightly pointed out, that the over dependence on China was kind of exposed very brutally in COVID times. So we do see OEMs thinking about moving the supplier networks closer to where they are located, so away from China to Latin America for American OEMs, into East Europe for European OEMs, and so on and so forth. And a related concept that we are also beginning to see, which is primarily more driven by political considerations, is around friendshoring, right? So supply chains are located in countries which are quote unquote more friendly compared to countries which are not. The impact we see are into three dimensions. As I said, one, you will have shortening supply chains. But the other big impact that we also see is that traditional auto supply chains were actually spread out into many countries. Even if a lot of it was coming from China, there were still specialist parts which may have been coming from different countries. But the pressures which were felt during COVID in terms of unpredictable lockdowns, not knowing where air capacity is available, where ocean capacity is available, etc. So we do see that even the spread itself will actually contract. So the supply chains will actually be restricted to a fewer countries than it was in the past. And that is where having the right skill set of manufacturing makes a huge difference. Today, if the sourcing is happening from 35 countries for any, let's say, a new product development, tomorrow, if it has to reduce to 20, the 15 countries which lose out are the ones which are lower on skill set and manufacturing readiness, and the 20 which will stay will be the winners. So that's the first theme that we'll talk through, and my colleague Shovik will walk through some of these examples in a minute. The second theme we wanted to touch upon was in terms of EV adoption. And while EV adoption has been, we've been talking about it for quite a few years now. It really took off in the last 2 years, as all of us know, in India. But the thing here that we want to talk about is not so much in terms of the vehicle or sort of the EV adoption itself, but what is the impact it has on the supply chain. So we do see, for example, that OEMs are wanting to secure their supply chains much more. OEMs are in fact planning their own processes in a way that assumes that supply chains will be risky. And there's a great example of Tesla software that we'll talk about here. So OEMs are taking a larger control over supply chain until the supply chain stabilize, the way, for example, it is for the IC engines. So that's the second theme. And we do see that given that, at least for India, it is still at a cusp. I mean, as things stand, there are a couple of OEMs which have very large volumes, but we do expect many other OEMs to actually come up in terms of ramping up the volumes sooner. Very shortly, this will also translate to requirements of supply chains from a servicing point of view, when these vehicles will actually enter the service work stream. So the traditional dealers will also need to be equipped. So all of these things will have an impact on how we service the supply chain, both for sales and service. So that is the second theme. The third thing we wanted to talk about was in terms of ESG. Now, again, ESG as a topic is not new. ESG's ownership of OEMs is not new. OEMs have always been traditionally very, very advanced in terms of thinking of how they become net zero, what sort of, let's say, compliances that they want to stand for. And in general, auto industry has been a little bit ahead of the average industries in terms of the professionalism with which they've approached ESG. The difference that we are seeing now is the fact that a lot of these pressures of ESG compliances are actually now translating to the supply chains. So the same compliance is expected of their supplier as the OEM has, to the extent that some OEMs have also talked the fact that they will not do business with suppliers who are not net zero in a certain time frame. So it's not enough for them to be ESG compliant. Their entire supply chains must become ESG compliant. The ratings, for example, are not just a financial and an operational rating, but also ESG rating. And the business allocation and the share of business that the suppliers are getting are already driven by their ESG performance as well. So it is no longer the fact that the OEMs were in some ways the sort of gatekeepers the thought leaders in this aspect, they are actually expecting the entire supply chains to also become compliant in those dimensions, and that has its own added pressures. I mean, apart from just financial pressures, because some of them will require additional investments, also in terms of management, in terms of better governance, in terms of thinking about diversity in their board of the board of companies. So there are multiple ways in which the supply chains actually will need to modify their ways of working if they want to be, let's say, a priority supplier to their OEMs as things stand. So those are the three themes that we thought were relevant in this world where all these pressures will eventually, which are being absorbed by the OEMs and also being translated to the supply chains. In some ways, the entities which will turn around faster will be the ones which will be winners. The countries which will be more agile, which will be more ready from a capability point of view, will be the winners, and whoever is much more flexible in terms of adopting to changing volumes, faster in terms of picking up ESG compliances, they will be the winners of this decade. So those were the three themes that we wanted to touch upon today, and then through the course of the day, again, the deliberation will be on each of these themes. So I'll now request my colleague Shovik to talk us through some of the examples of each of these three, which we are already beginning to see in the wider auto industry. Over to you, Shovik.
Yeah, thanks, Anshuman. Good morning, everyone. So I'll just thanks for setting up the context and the three themes. But just stepping back, we saw the chart of the automotive sales kind of going down to a trough during COVID and then again picking up. But if you see these last 3 to 4 years, right, 2019 to 2022 onwards, it's been an environment which is very unique. It's never happened before, right? There are multiple global events which are kind of impacting. It's almost like the butterfly effect, where something happens in one part and a completely unrelated area or an industry is affected because of things which are not within the control of the organization or even the supply chain in that sense. So ranging from things, and we've spoken about some of these like trade war, US-China, political unrest, climate change, but even things like cyber risk, or even cases where actually economic boom is there. So that's also leading to several cases where there's a kind of a supply loss or a kind of loss of sales because you're not able to kind of ramp up to that extent, right? And currency, of course, we know this is a critical thing, especially when you have global sourcing kind of networks in place. So it's been, I mean, it's not even a decade. It's almost like the last 5 years has seen almost all of these, right? And just to give you an example, and this is something that we had mapped out, if you look at the risk incidents that have happened, right, in the last 3 years, it's been 10x. So in 2019, if you see the number of risk incidents, about 1,700 or so, it's become 17,000 in 2022, right? And this is a phenomenal kind of a movement, right? It's never been seen before. And it's happening across the board, whether it's because of the environment, it's because of software, hacking, malfunctioning, errors, things which are driven more by social issues. I mean, no one could imagine that a Suez Canal blockage of a vessel would actually throw supply chains into complete disarray and your shipping rates, etc., skyrocketing and all of that, right? So some of those examples are given here, whether it's on labor-related issues, ESG, human rights, semiconductor chip shortage. We all saw that, pretty much it hit a trough again in the last decade. And because of the pandemic, higher use of personal devices impacted an industry like automotive, where chip shortages were there and the customers were not being served by the suppliers. And of course, ransomware, Russia-Ukraine conflict, we all know about how that has impacted gas prices and other supplies, nitrogen, etc. And of course, regulation as well. Like we spoke about ESG, now it's coming into law, and there are regulations which can also impose new obligations on supply chain, which can lead to increased risk as well, right? So this is a very unique time that we are in, and it's just a matter of 3 to 4 years that has seen this sort of a escalation in risks. So now, if coming more specifically to automotive and the components that we look at, so how do you really look at risk and kind of assess which are your areas of future supply disruption, right? So broadly, we've kind of tried to show in terms of components, what's the kind of competition from other industries, right? So that's the axis on the y-axis. And what is the investment that you require in order to kind of secure that sort of a supply for yourself, right? So from low to high. So if you see here, the top right is where you have the highest kind of competition from other industries, and also large investment period, right? So it's not easy to set up these manufacturing units. It requires investment, it requires time, it requires technology transfer. And the one components that come up top, and it's not surprising, is around electronics and your EV battery systems, right? So those are two which come up top, and even your motors, electrical systems, those are all the ones which are have competition from other industries, as well as fairly high kind of investment requirements. So it's not that easy to secure supply. And all the others like your ICE, your transmission are much lower, right? And that actually plays out also in terms of how we see the component industry itself changing, right? So all the large areas that we saw, which are on the top right, which means the maximum risk in terms of supply chain, are the ones which will become large and are the ones that will grow in the future, right? So driven pretty much by EV adoption, whether it's the electric drivetrain, battery, ADAS, sensors, these are the areas which are going to grow, and the ones which are less risky are the ones that are going to die out. So it's a very unique further complexity added that, the main areas where we will need to source, the main categories are the riskiest ones, the ones which have the most competition from other sectors, and also very difficult in terms of investment and payback and setting that up. So it's a very sensitive kind of a situation to be in at this point of time. So, of course, one of the things is around nearshoring, like Anshuman mentioned, and we'll cover some of the other levers as well. But now it's not China plus one anymore. It's people have realized that they really need to take back control of the supply chain. I think in a way, the world of globalization, we've used that term several times because of sourcing efficiencies and all of that, more integrated supply chains, etc. But I think now there's a clear trend of taking control back, bringing it either closer to you or to places which are kind of more friendly, like Anshuman mentioned. And that will kind of help you secure that supply chain, get more accessibility, have things like trade agreements, etc., in place, which can, in a way, mitigate some of the risk elements that can come in, right? And including things like language, professional culture, tax regimes, all of these things are considerations that are kind of driving nearshoring or friendshoring, like Anshuman mentioned, right? So some of the examples we spoke about, Latin America, Southeast Asia, all these are areas where manufacturing is moving, not just in components, but even for electronics, etc. We know of the large Vedanta Foxconn setup that's coming up in India as well. So countries which have more stable political environment, favorable macro conditions, availability of high skilled and also relatively cheaper labor, those are the ones that are really kind of going to emerge as potential destinations for setting up of these manufacturing bases. On the second topic, conscious of time, I think we have four or 5 minutes more. In terms of EV, of course, there is going to be an uptick. EV disruption is something that all of us were aware of, known that it's coming up. Now, all these things that we spoke about, the things that are impacting the supply chain, makes it even more challenging to ramp up. So OEMs are kind of investing in building capacity for manufacturing, specifically on battery. So that's one of the key elements which is very close to the entire ecosystem. And again, OEMs are investing so that they can get better control over those manufacturing facilities, and also ensure that supply shocks, etc., are kind of built in. So the example of Tesla, for example, which pretty much writes all the software, and they make it in such a way that it really doesn't matter. They can very easily switch over and kind of flash that software onto different ICs, etc., from different manufacturers. So in a way, they are controlling the very core part of the system, which really will drive the decision on the hardware, right? So that's a way in which they are trying to manage some of the supply side risks that they see. Similarly, there are also supplier OEM collaborations, and we'll talk about some of those as well, and which are the areas in which this is really working out in the favor, right? So this is just an example of some of the battery internalization plans. If you see, almost all the major global OEMs are setting up capacities. These capacities are in Europe, in the US, closer to their kind of base locations. And they are also kind of setting up JV capacity as well, right? And they have different JV partners, and whether it's Volkswagen's 40 gigawatt factory that they're setting up, Volvo setting up a similar kind of setup. And almost all OEMs are kind of focusing on battery because that's where 40% of the cost is going to be, right? So globally, there is a lot of collaboration in setting up capacity through JV kind of route as well. On the third point on how collaboration is playing out, if you take a look at this, there are a lot of areas. One, of course, cost, which is critical to the entire BOM, but also areas where there is interaction with the customer, right? So whether it's on the perception layer, which kind of drives a lot of the interactions that happen on the the screens which are present within the cars, or even the mapping, the steering, control, braking. All of these areas are places where OEMs are either self-innovating or they are kind of working with more local suppliers and local OEMs, right? So if you see this map, the purple bars pretty much, and this is a map of OEMs in China and also in Europe. A lot of areas there are collaborations with domestic suppliers, more aggressive localization strategy, and that's there pretty much to make sure that there is both cost as well as risk control on the supply chain. And this trend is there in the areas which are critical to customer experience as well, right? So whether it's on the sensors, on the perception layer, on decision-making layer, and the final kind of interfaces with the customers, those are areas where there is a lot more collaboration, either with suppliers or high degree of self-innovation that is being played out by OEMs, and lesser dependence on international suppliers, so as to say. Finally, on the third aspect, I think on ESG, like Anshuman mentioned, it's no longer just a topic good to have kind of thing. There are laws and regulations that are mandating you to comply with certain rules and certain standards and guidelines, right? So whether it's for example in Germany, there is a very clear responsible supply chain initiative, and all the major OEMs are part of it. And there is a standardized way of evaluating various companies in the supply chain, and a very clear way of rating suppliers on sustainability and how they're performing, right? Along with the usual considerations that we have in terms of quality, cost, and capacity and all of that when we are sourcing, right? Similarly, technologies like blockchain, etc., are also being used to ensure that when we say that something is green or something is ESG compliant, it is actually the case. So companies like Tesla, they are collaborating with a mining company in that way to make sure that the sourcing is using green mining, etc., for nickel, for example. And of course, OEMs are also talking about the suppliers. As we know, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 in terms of ESG is well known. And for automotive, the scope 2, which pretty much scope 2 and 3, which covers their immediate supply chain and even their suppliers, that's where almost 60-70% of the value lies, right? So almost all OEMs are pushing their suppliers also to achieve some of these carbon neutrality, etc., goals within a certain time frame. Now, what this means in terms of sourcing and our supply chain, we typically have a 7-step sourcing process that we do, right? So we start with kind of looking at where are my spend areas. We generate a certain supplier portfolio, we develop a category strategy, and then we kind of do the entire process of onboarding, developing the supplier, and then kind of having business as usual, and also tracking the performance. But in almost each of these areas, now sustainability has a role to play. So right from analyzing where your spend is, it's not just your spend, but it's also analyzing where your carbon hotspots are, right, within your entire spend profile and within your entire supply chain profile. And that's basically the starting point. And then it goes on to kind of looking at searching for suppliers who have sustainable products, green steel. We have suppliers who have certifications, and all of those are actually feeding into RFI, RFP criteria, right? And that is required to demonstrate it. Even things like TCO, when we the impact on environment and sustainability has a weightage that is being assigned in the total cost of ownership or the total cost of sourcing that particular product, and even over the life cycle of that component or that product in a way, right? So all of these are getting linked to very clear KPIs, and there is a requirement to kind of relook at how we do supplier relationship management, and kind of incorporate some of these sustainability metrics, etc., into those dashboards and KPIs, and pretty much becomes an integral part of our sourcing process. So I think that's all that I had. We are also at the top, I think, overshot by a couple of minutes, but broadly, these three themes are what's pretty much driving evolution in the supply chain. Happy to take any questions from the audience if there are.
I think we'll take the audience, the questions from audience in the end, if any, and we'll have a chat box open so the audience can push in questions there.
Sure.
I will now request Mr. S. Sitaraju, Chief Business Development Officer of Deen Dayal Port Authority, to deliver his address in the context of first and last mile delivery from a post-port perspective.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And first of all, thank you for giving this opportunity. Actually, after hearing our colleague and my counterparts, Mr. Anshuman Sinha and Souvik Banerjee, I think they were too technical. I'm not getting technical because I'm basically, when you are talking to Bhanumati, it was very clearly told. I've just, because it's out of a context topics, to be very honest with you. Nothing to do with the EV and all. I will try to touch upon some of point, but definitely it's not a technical, as I said actually. And I will divide this my entire discourse in a three part: the A and B and C. And A, basically, I will dwell on the bit of the what you call the bronze age digitalization, basically touching about the historical part of it, and of course the port and overall, because I believe in macro and micro. So I'll try to touch upon the macro part of it so that the micro gets connected like port and all. Second part, I will come into specifically in terms of Make in India, that aspect where the port will be try to get into connected. Gateway of the India will be getting, I try to get connected. And third, the last, I will put my own perspective of the things which is going around and where exactly India can gel with the global integration and globalization. That's my third aspect. So start with my first A. Please, yeah, thank you. Is basically we are talking about civilization. See, anything, everything. I remember one very good quote by our late Prime Minister, late Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who stating we can change the history, but we can never change the geography. That is the point. It has got two strong connotation on that, because when we talk about history, we can change it in terms of what we have been doing today, what we had earlier, in terms of our growth strategy, and second part, geography, which is in fact obviously the port related, which we're dwelling on to. In that context, you see, civilization has in the port the huge civilization, because you see about the entire globe, we got 1 or 3/4 is water, virtually where the water is their domain. So we have been doing this seawater transaction over a period of time. In fact, this is that because we have not had a road, didn't have rail connectivity, but definitely we had a water connectivity. I can even we talk about the Mohenjo-Harappa, that point of our Indus Valley civilization, what we call it, or that way even Chola dynasty about 5,000 years ago, an Egyptian Chola dynasty, in fact, went across the places like Indonesia, Java, Sumatra to do all this trading. We were the pioneer in that point of the silk, masala, all the things, in fact. So we had a pioneer that time. I mean, because in that time, if you see the overall GDP, by that time we have been ruling the entire globe over more than 30% plus the GDP of India. And we also aware how the entire globe has been bulging towards India to come with the top of Wensang or all the top, Nalanda Vishwavidyalaya there, we had it. So we are proud of our own civilization there. That's the reason I thought we would start with this point. Then I have to highlight the after civilization, because no urbanization can really take into context, can into shape without a civilization actually. Then how the urbanization came into context? When there was civilization, urbanization also fall into place. Particularly the urbanization take globally first in Europe, where all urbanization talk about the cities, you talk about multimodal connectivity, the commercial centers, all which first came into Europe. Then from, of course, then it came into North Africa, they developed it, and Japan and Korea, South Korea. Finally, it landed up there in the entire urbanization in China. China was the last to virtually complete the entire urbanization part of it in 2014, 15 more than. But finally, we are India. We have taken it up very strongly. There we have now huge connectivity, multimodal connectivity, where they talk road and the rail and aviation, and the port, which I'll be touching upon. So we are now into that part. So after civilization, which important is the urbanization taking place. And with that, urbanization cannot be completed without industrialization. How the industrialization, it has got also parallel, in fact, is going along with the urbanization. Industrialization first took in Europe. The industrial revolution took place. Then in fact, then it's followed by, you can see, the lot of automobile later there came into. Then USA was the pioneer. In fact, when you talk about supply chain, the USA Ford was the first among the lot all the automobile who really set the exemplary of the entire integrated supply chain from the steel manufacturing, from HR to CR, and the process and getting the all the integrated all the parts of the entire automotive, and then finally, of course, and making it to a global leader in particular there. After the 1939 World War, Second World War, in fact, this so-called real niche advantage what US were then taken over by the Japan. In fact, and you have Honda, you had a Toyota, they took over. They had, in fact, what they call a kaizen, because perfection, because that is a perfect kind of thing, because they won't compromise on the quality. They'll be 100% quality concept there. So that is how the next the Japan took over the VNO around this thing. So this is the second part. Yeah, the third part, I'm sorry. And then the globalization, in fact, in terms of World War 95, we have seen a lot of connectivity, the trading, export, import also took over after the Second World War. We have seen it. Then real comes in the Indian context in 1990, Nuri Narasimha Rao's government, where we started liberalizing the whole thing. Then we see that all particularly when the liberalization we talk about, we cannot think of the anything other than the core sector. Cement, in fact, was ruling there, it was totally controlled, it was decontrolled, and steel, aluminum, all these things. Then, of course, we have seen a lot of free trade started taking place, and there we had industrial development took place. Particularly, I can say about 2004 onward, what you call it, a special economic zone, an export-oriented unit, free trade warehousing zone, industrial. Each and every state were having the industrial development center, industrial development. So we saw pan-India. The real growth has been taking place where the industry started, and you also aware we initially went gone into steel industry. Then there were a lot of mini steel plants that came into forefront, and we also seen big companies like POSCO. They came over. They started thinking about 10,000, 15,000 crores of investment, and such a big industry. Tata grown up that time into a larger scale of operation. In fact, they put a CRM plant all across. So we have seen during that liberalization time only, we are really growth. The entire world has started identifying, recognizing this is a place where the investment could be future investment. Then, of course, followed by the latest with the digitalization, which we will see all the entire globe, the Google, now we see the iPhone manufacturing out there from China. That all come to the China part also separate lastly. Then finally of the year, today's topic of carbon decommission. See, and in port particularly, we are taking a lot of interest in environmentalization, because we are seeing there this is a place where the government has already put a lot of policy matters in terms of putting that solar energy, the wind energy, and the ammonia, what you call it, green ammonia manufacturing facilities also they started with. Yeah, please, next. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay.
Yeah, sure. 1 minute.
No problem. So then this is the A part broadly at but this is the B part. Yeah, next. The B part is basically coming to the point of the Indian growth story. In fact, real growth, I will say, it started coming in 2014, where the policy, why I say the real thing, because when it's a possible when we started growing first, it is basically general growth which takes place, then the specific kind of growth which started taking 2014, I can really highlight it, because that is the point when the really Make in India came into, because in the Make in India, particularly my sector, which is the port, where we're given thrust in fact. So that is where in fact, all this industrial support system has been created, because a lot of incentives have been given to this industry who are coming from across the globe. Because we remember that was the time when the entire globe started looking at it, India as the epicenter of the future investment proposition. The entire world came out there to see how they make, because it's just changing from the earlier made in India to Make in India, where we can really, and basically this theme was to see the manufacturing enhancement of the manufacturing facility in all the states out there. Make in India, one good thing in the Niti Aayog has been really envisaged is that they created a competitive flavor among all the states. In fact, they're putting a ranking of 100 odd category, they put it across, and this state has to put all the parameters so that they can come into forefront and stating, yes, there we are. So we have seen Telangana, we have seen the Gujarat, model, all the things which really came in. That is the biggest thing changes which took place where the states were competing with others in terms of internship, in terms of facilitation, in terms of either doing business, all the things they have been supporting. So that this industry, so-called industry invest, they came over there finding it big. Because India has got a very federalist structure where, the policies are being made out there, made out there in the center, but the implementation has been taken place out there in the states. So that's the one I see it's going to be. I think it can be find a federalist. That's the beauty of the federalist structure of the operation out there. So of course, then they came Digital India, Gati Shakti, and this all the basically policies matter which we're talking about. Which is ultimately aim is to see how fast we can facilitate in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of decision process, in terms of getting the investors' sentiment taken care of, so that they can really come out with operation and commercialization of their capacity and the production faster. Specifically, when we come to my part of port and port-led industrialization, is basically we have Sagarmala project. The Sagarmala was conceived based on the 4 pillars. Out of the prime pillar was the port and port-led industrialization. See, when you talk about port and port-led industrialization, because you see the entire globe as a whole, you see that all the goods you take about Europe, Antibes or Belgium, or you talk about any part of the world, in China, finally, then Korea, everyone, all the cities, development has taken abetting the ports. We had, in fact, when you made a study on that, when I made a personal study on that, when I was heading the CEO of the SCZ of the JNPT, when we made a study, we know that this all our industries growth were away almost 300 kilometers away from the port. So that was one area, because when it's away from it, the cost escalation factor was not touching almost 12 to 15% of the cost. In fact, that was a huge cost which we were incurring. So this port-led industrialization was the original idea, to bring all these industries, make it next to the port. That was the original idea. What we call it, international globalization hubbing center, where the hub and scope concept came into. So the entire global supply chain can meet next to there. In fact, so the import and export can be taken a faster pace of there. That is where the SCZ came into play there. So coastal economic zone along the SCZ. So I can give one example. JNPA, which I did, that was one of the most successful stories which India is still carrying out there. We have set about more than 600 acres of land, where even the top of the, even Foxconn had to spend almost time. Then of course the tendering process, they have to do it. The DPO ultimately they own it. But that 2 crores per acre of the land, that bidding went up to 13 crores, almost 7 times. So that was the importance. If we can really do a good kind of ecosystem, and for the industry, they are ready to put where the money, where the pie is, in fact. So that is a huge achievement, I can say. That is where the real, what I call a gold mine, the gateway of the gold mine is lying next to the port. So that is the asset monetization which we were talking about, GNPA and all that. When now, of course, currently I'm taking as part of the central excellence for the ministry. I've been looking after the DPA and Deen Dayal Port Authority. Okay, which we have got. It is basically self-contained port in terms of the all the types of, you can say, terminal operation there, liquid dry, container, bunkering, SPM, LNG, all is there. Where they really and the biggest part of this port also, I should add it here, is that is a huge land bank that is available next to it, about 2.75 lakh hectares of land that is available next to the port. That is where the real investment propositions are coming out, and that is the place where the future investment possibilities can come into there. So that is another huge, and Deen Dayal Port is having almost 2 lakh acres of land is to be there. In fact, of course, it is. If you see deep into there, the land part, whether it's a good piece of land, another one is the tidal land, that of course you can, another part which is, but land is available. It's a number one port in terms, in fact. But having said that, there are some policy challenges, bottlenecks which are there, obviously, because port are really the prime activities is to see the shipping and not exactly into industrialization. So now they're really we are taking care of the policy matter in terms of it can be comparable with the state industrial development center or that matter, even SEZ or that matter. So that they've taken care. In fact, we are coming out with the policy changes, all the government taking on that part of it. In terms of green shipping, now, as I said, touched upon, the green shipping is basically promoting wind, solar, hybrid, green, and ammonia. Green ammonia has got a huge demand, in fact, there, because our Prime Minister has spoken about it, and even even we had spoken there in the Europe that we want to be leader in that, particularly in the green hydrogen. So we are proposing a lot of centers next to. I think we had a conference in Denmark. A lot of centers opportunity that is there next to the port, where the what we call electrolysis process can take care of in terms of green energy. That is a feature again which has to be from the conventional energies actually. So coming to this final part, actually, I will say there's another factor. What exactly the status I call it a C part. The exact today's status there. With the changes in the policies, with the changes in the mindset and the opportunity, the two things which is emerging out there is China and that non-China factor. Because if the companies those are getting out of China, going to India, we should not only bother why it is not coming to India, but at the same time, we should why it is not coming to India, because they're going out to, some of them have gone to Vietnam, even some of them even go Bangladesh. So that is the real point to be point of concern, because China has got a different kind of operation system. I think slowly the entire globe is coming into awakening key. Why not China? Because they are talking China +1 today. See, every company. So today, if you have iPhone, has been started manufacturing in India, back to one of the reasons, in fact. And slowly, steadily, all these companies have realized that it cannot be China, it should be China +1. And what is the alternative for it? Its alternative is none other than India. So India has got all the ecosystem, all the facilities. In the policy matter has been even changed, even the tax concession has been already been provided. So that is what I feel. The India is having a huge opportunity. We had 2014 on opportunity. Now again, this new opportunity coming up into the galore there, where we can play a huge role, and we could see that has been taking a very strong shape of it actually. Another thing which I will before coming into final word. So that is what we can see. India can notch up this entire opportunity, and I could see that future availability are there. So this is a time. So the people and the investors are looking at it. They can have a really investment out there. I could see from the earlier my presentation from my so we can know that. I don't see any investment proposition of these automotive industries are really coming in India. I think if we've been getting deep down it, I think there are opportunities there, and we need to understand it, particularly in terms of the FTWZ, SCZ opportunity that's available. I think this could be the great opportunity for there. With this note, I am really open for further kind of a point of you want to say it actually. And we also have a EV cluster. That's another one which you want to add it there, which is the next to output. And with that, we have to find it out. I think there are a lot of opportunities that is galore. And so it's again the consumer don't look at the exactly of the great product. They have to look at the right product. Final point I should also add it here is in terms of the support system. That is what to be given there, because when an investor comes with a lot of hopes, expectation, and aspiration. So we should really in a place to give them a support system, handholding, and so that they should be treated as a part of our entire process as a member of the entire fraternity. Then what they will also stick to that, which we are definitely as a government body trying to do. Final word, I should end with one of very old quote, which is one of my favorite. I should share with you. Of course, before that, I say coming together where there is righteousness in heart, there is beauty in character. Where there is beauty in character, there is harmony in the home, and where there is harmony in the home, there is order in the nation, and where the order in the nation, there's a peace in the world. This is most important. We need a peace in the world in order to have a successful business proposition in this country, because we see a lot of unrest all around. So let's hope that peace prevails, and we can take it from the next level to get this all the investment across the globe. Thank you very much once again, Bhanumati, and all the colleagues for having a patience hearing. So I'm open to any Q&A. Thank you very much once again, Bhanumati. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satyarasu. Apologies, I got the name wrong the first time, but thank you for your sharing your thoughts and the progression. And I'm sure, sir, it all like Bharatmala, it all links into the perspective of EVs with ports, because as somebody said that, you know, managing cost of EVs will also be a challenge, and if they are clustered around ports, then a lot of things will fall into place for managing supply chain costs. I next call on Mr. Sudhir Gurtu to deliver his inaugural address, please, sir.
Thank you, Anilji. Thank you, Bhanuji, and the CIA logistics team for picking up this nice topic. It's very relevant in today's world, as we already saw. All the speakers mentioned that it's no more a VUCA world. VUCA used to be 20 years back, but since COVID hit us 3 years back, it's something smart VUCA and much beyond a VUCA world, which is we have to be ready with, all of us. And hence, I must say the topic is good, and also 3 segments we are going to talk about are extremely interesting. The ESG, the electric vehicle aspects, and the nearshoring thing, all are relevant to the future. So we need to be actually cognizant of all this and change ourselves as we go. Because when we talk about logistics, logistics simply means moving, right? In one word, if I have to define what is logistics, it's movement, it's moving. And if you have to move basically goods, parts, chemicals, oil, you have to be ready for a lot of new issues today, which were non-existent or rather not perceived by us 10 years back. For example, someone mentioned oil prices going up. And I recall when I was in my college days, there's a huge oil spill in the marine world, somewhere near Cape Town, I guess, South Africa, where a tanker broke into 2. And there's 100,000 tons of oil in the ocean. It's a big ESG issue today. I can't imagine, I guess, today, such an issue happening. But in mid-85, 80s, it just went by and a lot of marine life was lost and dead fish arriving on the shores. So today, I think a lot of precautions are taken so that such events of major spills, disasters, do not really trigger, do not happen. So from that aspect, the logistics or the movement piece of it, we have to now rechange our thinking. All of us, we are mostly in logistic companies. I was trying to read the list. So we have to redefine our boundary. ESG is one big change which we have to actually accept and adopt. I think some of you mentioned already, there's ESG ratings available. We need to look at the ratings and get it done for us, so we understand where we exist, where we are today on the map. In fact, at LEADEC, we take up crating services, which is we move parts across from tier 1s to OEMs, like say from Bosch to say Tata Motors plant, and get the crates back, recycle the collapsed crates back. So there also we're seeing a lot of ESG change hitting us, companies like us. For example, earlier we used to just get the crate back on the line. Today, even if it has a drop of oil coming back, whether from our operation or from the parts being sent in that, it's no more acceptable to the customer. So you have to now wash and pre-wash these crates before you put it back to the customer's line. So you change in terms of cost handling the crates, but there's no choice. You have to get it accepted and get it done. So we also got our ESG ratings carried out by, I think, Sustainability is another, Sustain Analytics is one of the company who does that. And luckily we were rated low, so we survived. But many companies are not even getting it done out of a fear that the ESG rating will be off the, the charts. So they are kind of fearing the action and of course saving cost as well. In India, we know we are extremely cost conscious, and unless forced to spend, we just don't spend. So many times we try to wait till we're told to do it. And coming back to another example on this, where I was in a Shanghai plant and I was walking around and happened to go to the backyard of the plant. in China some years back. There I found a confined pit, and in that I see one maybe 200-liter drum sitting there, and it was all clean, nice, nothing else I could see, just a pit, and there's another few pits next to it as well, which are empty. But this one 200-liter paint drum or something sitting in this confined pit. So I was actually quite curious to know what's happened, why this drum is sitting there, because there's no leak I could see there. So I asked the supervisor, and he said we have SOP, and he says when unloading from a truck, if the drum even has one drop of paint below it on the bottom, you put it in this confinement pit for 24 hours. Thereafter, the guy picks it up and puts it online, or the supplier is called. So he picked up the drum and showed me the one oil paint drop down there, which, so I thought to myself, in India, if this would be the story, if the reaction would be, oh, just wipe it, move on, put it on the line. But he said the SOP is very critical. If this guy is caught putting this one paint drum on the line, he may be in deep trouble, the operator. So the SOPs are so solid there. This I'm talking 10 years back now. Today, even India is changing, so very slow. We are still not there. But these SOPs, what they are built, they literally follow to the last hill. Whereas in India, we look for some good excuse. Oh, there's shortage on the line, so I put it there, this drum. No, it's really not a leak, you know. So this drum was really not leaking, but it sat in the pit for many hours. And it was obviously a clear drum. But had it been a leak, the supplier would have been called, and they would not just have called him, just not talk to him. They would have asked for a root causing. So he would have to check maybe the seam welding machine is not good in the drum. Seam welding issue of the drums, I don't know, could be external oil being spilled onto the drum, could be a trucking factor, could be the gloves of the guys who are handling the drum. So a lot of root causing possibilities exist. So unless the supplier would then close with the root causing report, then they'll move on. Honestly, even today, I'm interacting with many plants, and I don't think we are there anywhere close. So that's where we are most cost conscious. We try to save money. That has to change, and we have to lead the change. I mean, all those in this call today, we have to lead the change. We have to ensure we do what we say, not just say and then keep it aside and do what we want to do. So that's across, whether it's ESG, any of the environmental aspects or the social aspects. So ESG basically social is for safety, for health, for people, governance, all these issues. Where I find we need to lead a change is really mean what we say and act the way the others act. And this, I think Mr. Sitarasu mentioned, he's looking for investments in India. People should come, companies should come invest in India. Very true. He's ready with his ports. Good to hear that. But again, when we talk to the outsiders, the Europeans, the Americans, the first 2 points I will say about India, which we need to work on, is infrastructure, which of course the government is working. Last many years they have moved the gears. And second, of course, is these compliance, ESG and SOP kind of issues, ethics and the labor laws and all that. So that's where I think we have to lead a change to really make it happen in India. Of course, manufacturing is happening, but it's still a long way, and supporting that is logistics. So where logistics has to be ready with smart, agile logistics, and I see agility is mentioned in the title, friendly, agile supply chain. So agility also is very important in logistics for us. So we have to be ready with quick response, strategy change, as need comes in. So I think COVID time, we saw a lot of strategies change with a lot of companies. And as I think earlier mentioned by my friends, Mr. Sitarasu, also Mr. Shovek and Shuman, they all mentioned how the COVID world that has made us change. The container shortage hit us, if you recall. The chip shortage hit us later. All these were impacting our supply chain. Supply chain costs have gone up. and oil prices, the war, all these changes continuously are making us change for the better. So it's a forced change now. We have no choice, but we have to be agile. So when I say agile, I mean not just agility in terms of energy, but also smart changes towards the smart digitization, the IoT, the industry 4.0, the tracking, the GPS, all that is coming in, and logistics has to lead in those fronts so that it can deliver the make in India or manufacture in India concepts. And that will also pull more investment into India, which is ultimately what we want. Unless the investment comes into India and really we get piece of China, let's say China +1, or what, grab some of the nearshoring concepts. Because today we also see Vietnam, not India, has better prepared and taking away some of the investments from China into Vietnam. So we were studying why Vietnam is so successful, whereas India is, I would say, behind Vietnam in terms of grabbing what is available in terms of change shoring, I call it. So it's from China, it may move somewhere else. Could be back to Mexico for US guys, closer to home. Could also be India, could be Indonesia, Vietnam, any of the ASEAN countries. So that's a potential for movement. Some of it is definitely coming to India already. A lot will come in more. But we have to see how we can grab a lot more which we deserve. Because we have the low cost workforce available here, right? So that's a big advantage. And we have a lot of youngsters, our 60% plus is 30, 35-year-old guys, right? Working capability is very high. But in the same ratio, you don't see the investments pouring into India, which should have happened. So where we can help in logistics, I guess, is be agile, change smartly, change to adopt the new practices. And if you see agility, one of the good examples I could think of from India is Asian Paints. So if you see the inventory management they do, it's really nice, just in time at the point of paint consumption. So we have the customer of ours. So we see it very nicely being done in terms of agile logistics. Another one I would say is Nike, the shoes and apparels company. I believe there are more than 700 plants in the world and spread over maybe 40 plus countries. So what they do smartly is move the material from one to the other plant quickly. So they save a lot of money on possible obsolescence of material, model change, fashion change. So they smartly move this across the 700 plants. And agile logistics, good example again. So we have to now be ready with such examples also. That at LEADEC, where we are, we're also preparing for these smart crating systems through an app, tracking every part which we move for tier 1 to OEM. Even ESG elements around the logistics services we have. And we're also getting into talking of EV, which is also one of the segments covered. What we take up battery assembling services, battery disposal kind of services. So these are now growing, coming into India. We do this more elaborately in the European plants with the auto OEMs. But even there, if you see, logistics plays a very critical role. Because when you're assembling these batteries, if the SOPs are not right, you'll have a resultant fire maybe some years down on the road. And root causing then may be very difficult because the evidence is lost. So SOP, because these batteries, as someone mentioned, 1/3 of the cost in the future vehicles of cars is pure battery. 1/3 of the weight of the car, believe it or not, whole floor is battery, typically. So it's a very critical mass which has to be handled correctly. Disposal of battery is very critical as well. So we just throw batteries around. I'm sure you know it's just a strict no-no from ESG guys. So you have to handle it correctly. If you want to salvage the material, that's still expensive, but that's another line of service existing for the future. We also work at automotive plants enormously. So large business of ours is services of maintenance of plants, So let's say if you go to Mercedes plant here in Pune, where we are maintaining for them the plant, the conveyors and all the equipment. So similarly, we do this abroad as well. And what we encounter, these plants are all gearing up for this change. And I'll try to restrict to logistic examples. But at one of the plants in Audi in Neckarsulm, where I think they built the R8, they were taking trials of drone. So drone for supplying the steering wheel from the warehouse to the line. So I'm sure you know the door, the assembly is done on the line, and the cycle time for the car movement on the line. So you need a steering wheel, let's say every 40 seconds, if that's a cycle time. But typically what's happening as you go, the steering wheel is no more the standard steering wheel. Each car has a dedicated steering wheel. This lady wants a pink soft fabric steering wheel, whereas this businessman wants a leather brown. So the trials they were taking were to fly this from the warehouse as per the broadcast, each wheel to the line. So using the kind of vertical space, so no more the trolley supply systems. So that is agile logistics, that is smart logistics. And these are coming in. And we have to accept and change all these mechanisms which are coming in. At Volvo, they're using holographics. You know, understand holographics, where the screen in front of you pops up, and you can, so instead of having paper being printed and given to the line, they have the door assembly guy has a screen. He knows, I have to pick this handle and that scissor lift for the glass and put it into this door. And similarly, I think the other plants we came across, some of our colleagues have seen BMW driverless tuggers managing the place. So from the warehouse, you have these tuggers which have no driver. It's a laser guided system which takes the tugger and delivers the parts and comes back. I think someone mentioned Tesla, and I was in US a few months back. I happened to have a drive in a Tesla which was driven by automated driving. So car was driving you, and there's no need of the driver anymore in San Francisco. So that's beautifully mapped by Tesla, because Tesla plant is right there. But not all cities are mapped yet. But future, if you see, we have to be ready for these kind of big changes. But again, in the interest of time, I'll have to stop here, because I think my time's up now. But in short, just to summarize, we all need to be ready for the change. We need to lead this change in terms of ESG, electric vehicles, in terms of nearshoring, China plus one strategy, help India get investment into our country and change our logistics, accept the SOPs and make them happen, is what I'll say. Enforce the happening of the SOPs, not just shut the eye to save cost. That's my last request to you all. And all the best for the next 3 upcoming sessions. And thanks to the sponsors as well for the show today. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gurtu, for your enlightening address. And as I've been given the responsibility of closing remarks, so if I could just sum up the common factors that, between the 3 speakers and the theme of the conference, the quick summary would be: one is VUCA is no more a term, it's a reality. It's a reality we all have to live with, adapt to, and move forward. Second is ESG is here to stay now. It's got clear benchmarks. There is monitoring, reporting, compliance, KPIs being monitored by, let's say, OEMs and the tier 1 companies. So it's high time that all component suppliers, everybody takes up a distributed responsibility and starts doing their bit, so that they don't get hit by, compliance or something when it becomes unviable for them to adapt. And, every year, if you keep on taking small steps, then you won't feel the pinch at the end of it. One thing which is very clear is that the rate of speed of change has completely changed. So I will thank Mr. Satirasu for his slide, which showed how the urbanized world or the industrial world has progressed over the years. And if you see the layers, and every layer, the amount of years it took, so the last few changes have just taken decades or 1 decade. previously it used to take maybe a century or a decade for a change to manifest. But over the last few years, as we have seen, internet, TV, of course, we are veterans, so we know the radio times also. But radio, TV to VCR, and all that change, these are all decadal changes. These are not centurion changes. And after the internet, again, the rate of speed of change is kind of taken off. So I thank Mr. Gurtu for highlighting that adaptability is the only thing which will keep us relevant in the years to come. Thank you very much, sir. And last but not the least, my friends from AT Kearney, the bad news is the BCP planning revenue stream is dead because the VUCA has happened and all business continuity plans have gone. But the ESG stream is today what most of the consultants need to drive and need to drive home to people for them also to be relevant tomorrow and help the industry transform itself. So ESG is going to be a big revenue churner for you. That's what I can feel. And last but not the least, to keep the costs low in spite of nearshoring, L1 being history and all, clustering of industry and investments in software and hardware both will actually help you to be ahead of the curve and be competitive. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing this knowledge with us and our viewers. And if Dr. Bhanumati permits, then I'll call this session to a close, Doctor. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, speakers. Thank you, presenters. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.